Guys, welcome back to Reading Between the Lines. Today we are going to be taking a look at some of the tools that possibly were used to bring in the last reset. Now this is also, just wanted to point out that this is a theory. Those of you who watch my channel are pretty familiar with the mud flood theory and the last reset, and most people think that something happened in the 1840s to 60s that has been erased, or there's something wrong with our historical timeline. And what I do is I look for holes within the histories, inconsistencies, things like that, that can point to this great mystery that could back it up. So what I was thinking about was how, during the Age of Discovery and then on into the Age of Enlightenment, there were some really dynamic figures. There was a lot of really cool history. Just the idea of discovering the New World, the way they handled it was terrible. But the idea, these things that, like, supposedly, I just did a video on Peter the Great, who was just, a true Renaissance man. A man, he's a king, he builds boats, he makes watches, he is a philosopher, he's a father, he's a husband, he's a painter, all of these things, and he builds a city and he creates armies, and there's so many enigmatic figures like Peter the Great from these times. This is just a little example. This is the ancient times, just mentioned some major philosophers from the time. St. Augustine, the only one they could think of, I guess, during this time. I didn't make this timeline. And then all of a sudden, boom, 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 like a bunch. There's a bunch of really, really famous and enigmatic men who had put out these treatises, these pamphlets, these books filled with philosophy and new thoughts, and exploring the mind and the possibilities of existence and nature and reality and physics. And it was just it was abundant, and not every one of these men were from wealthy families. It was just, it seems like that up until recently, people thought better. People were able to think better. And it got me to thinking, I was like, what in the heck happened? See, this is more just all these great men with all these great philosophies, and there hasn't been a whole lot of new thought in at least 100, 150 years. And I'm like, well, what the heck happened? Now, I know that the 20th century was filled with brutal warfare. And that was a setback for the entire race of humanity. It really was. And that could definitely play a part, but what kind of thought could have led us into that kind of century of brutal warfare? And what happened? And that's kind of why we all feel like something happened. The old world had the architecture, it had the artists, it had the well-developed minds. And then nowadays, it's just not the same. And we want to know, a lot of people want to know, like, what happened? How do we get it back? And why did it go away? These are just some of the men of the last, this was from the 17th century. Just famous thinkers, that we haven't seen the like of since. There's Galileo, Isaac Newton, Peter the Great, John Locke, John Hamilton, Mozart, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Voltaire. This is more continuing to the next century. Rousseau, Adam Smith, Hegel, William Wilberforce, Thomas Paine, Hume, Antoine Lavoisier, James Watt, Alexander von Humboldt. This is just a small portion of the kind of thinkers. And when I was looking through all these pictures. These are all pictures of men that I recognized by name. By name, I could look at them and I could recognize them. And that's how famous they are. And we just don't have that anymore. Here's some more. Here's, let's see, where are we here? Another one of James Watt, who he's an an inventor of electricity, and we get a lot of our terms from him. Samuel Morse from the Morse Code. Thomas Edison, who we all know is really not the good guy that we were taught a long time ago, which makes sense. Look at his eyes. Look at that. It's very, he looks sinister to me. I just don't like him. And Tesla, and then even on to Darwin and Marx and Nietzsche, who I don't agree with very often at all, but still they were great thinkers. Then you move to the next century and you've got Freud and Rand, Carl Jung, Lenin, which not my favorite, but oh, I forgot who this guy was. He's postmodernist. He's not my favorite at all. But McKinnon, Sam Harris. This is the guy that wrote Gulag Archipelago. Solzhenitsyn, I think. Anyway, these two are supposed to be separate than these people. This is more towards modern day postmodernism. We've got these like unserious postmodern thought that's basically saying that nothing's absolute, and it's just if you've read Atlas Shrugged, she's talking about people like this. It's just a disgusting philosophy that that encourages weakness, encourages selfishness, do as thou wilt, which is actually a Satanism creed. But it's just, that's the kind of philosophers that we started getting, you know, with the occult, the people like Alexander Pike and Alexander Crowley, you know. I didn't want to put their pictures in here. That's the kind of thought that we've morphed from these great men into these like silly men, and then now it's even worse. You know, we've got Steve Jobs, who was really a really smart man, and he did a great thing with the Apple computers, and he probably should not be lumped in with these people. I really have respect for Steve Jobs. Unfortunately, he's not around anymore, and his mode of thinking is gone. It seems like these guys are way more in it for power than anything. You know, Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, who's that? Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates. It's just, you know, we've gotten to these people, and it's like, what the heck happened? Like, what's going on? How do we go from a time of such enigmatic people and such great thinkers to these clowns? You know, I mean, yes, they're smart, they have high IQs, but they have no depth. They spiritual depth, none whatsoever. They can't think beyond what's like completely in the material. You know, I mean, zeros and ones, sure, they're all probably, or these two at least, are probably pretty autistic. You know, their social skills I'm sure that many famous men across time had social issues, but I mean, they weren't weaklings like these people, these guys. It's just gross. You know, what's going on? Where did our minds go? How come we're not producing these great thinkers anymore? I just don't get it. So I was looking into it, and I came across something that I think might have something to do with it, that could explain it. Or, you know, at least if there was a really great reset, you know, and during the 1800s, this was a tool that has been used to rewrite the history for certain. It's called the Encyclopedia of, say, the Dictionary of Reason and Sciences, and it was a major deal. It was a big deal when it came out in the late 1700s. This was counted still today as one of the major influencers to the French Revolution. The most prolific thinkers of the day were all in France, right? And slightly a little bit in St. Petersburg, Russia, which is kind of why I'm suspicious of St. Petersburg, Russia. But they were in France, usually Paris, in the salons. They were the great thinkers. They were the writers. Everyone who was anyone, you know, all the intellectuals spoke French during that time. And it was the beginning of the Enlightenment, or what we call the Enlightenment, which to me is I would rather think of it as like the cover for the Great Reset. That's kind of what I think of it as. But this book, this first, it wasn't the actual first encyclopedia, but it was the first. Well, it was the most influential. It was the one that sold the most, the biggest one, the one that actually I believe has changed the world. It was highly political. Many of the much of it was written by like one or two guys, and then there was a whole bunch of political articles in it. it was very, very pro-revolution. It was banned in Paris. It was banned from being published. It was banned from being sold. A couple times the publishers changed hands. They had to do half of it first and then print the other half another time. They ended up printing some of it in Switzerland. It was atheistic. It was very much, the people who wrote it were very much against imperialism and against, I don't know how you call it, church controlling things. I guess theology, theology ruling the day. It was against both of those and believed that the intellectuals should be the ones that run the world. That's basically the basis of the whole French Revolution. It was the church, it was the imperial powers against the intellectuals of the day. And the intellectuals were really quite a force back then because, again, whatever has happened hadn't happened yet, and people were still able to think. Now, there was an emphasis on materialism. And if you don't understand what materialism is, I suggest you look it up. But we live by it today. It has to do with the senses. If you can't smell, touch, feel, or feel it, then or see it, then it doesn't exist. That it's not of any consequence. It's kind of a reactionary thing, reactionary from all the theology and the spiritualism that the medieval times were dealing with. But it's like the pendulum. The pendulum swings way too far one way, it swings way too far the other before it settles back in the middle. And right now we're at the edge of the pendulum. They were still in the middle here. They still were not totally rejecting spiritualism or the idea that consciousness had more depth to it than just the two-dimensional of our senses. But this is the beginning of the materialism. And it was written by only a handful of people, which is concerning considering the influence that it still has, actually, the influence that it has had. So this is an example of some of the intellectuals of the day. They're discussing things. This is very reminiscent of the Roman Senate, right? Where they were all together and they were all equals and they were discussing things. And this is a version of that, really. So the main chief editor was Denis Diderot. I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't know French, so I'm just guessing here. The encyclopedia never would have happened without him. He was actually a pretty decent guy. I don't think he knew what he was doing when he put this together. But he was trying to reform every field of culture and life that was the zeitgeist of the time, which was it was definitely a transition period. He was the librarian of Catherine the Great and a patron of Catherine the Great, which is another thing that makes me suspicious about this whole work, because I already did the video on Peter the Great with Voltaire, and I believe that there was this is a time when a lot of history was covered up and rewritten by people like Diderot and Voltaire. And this was during that time. And I think Catherine the Great might have even sponsored some of it, which explains why the history of Peter the Great is such a great history, such a great man. It was her grandfather, I believe. Maybe her great-grandfather, I'm not sure. So he wrote extensively on the purposes and value of education. This is kind of the father of the idea of public education, which is another way that the controllers, quote unquote, or the elites control the population, right? And I don't really know if he knew what he was getting the world into, but he did believe in a two-class education system, one for the laboring class and then one for the ruling class, or the intellectual class, but he did actually suggest that there should be a beginning, like a beginning school, and then if the exceptionally smart could be rooted out, and that would be a way of actually moving from the labor class into the intellectual class. And that was kind of the idea of what America is, right? And that's kind of where the idea of the education system took such root into people's minds, is because it was a way for the lower class to move into the upper class if you were smart enough. That has totally been warped and changed in today's world. It's not that way anymore. But he had some issues. Like he didn't, he was a Plato. He read the Republic. He very much believed that that parents should forfeit all authority over the children for the duration of their education. He believed that it was parents in society that were ruining people, and that if they could only get a good education and into the right mindset, that this world would be a better place. And we still kind of have those thoughts today. And this is all from this one book, from the Diderot, I think Diderot, and from this encyclopedia. It's a false promise, you know, that education, the government provided education, will cure all ails, that the people coming from the schools will have a more enlightened view and a better way to better, you know, and especially infused with its atheism. It's very humanist and materialist. It's like, oh, we know the better way, and we can change the world if only you give us your kids while they're young. You know what I mean? This is another man that was very influential in the encyclopedia, Jean Le Rond de la Embreux, whatever that is. But he definitely was not quiet about how he felt. See, this is back before people thought they needed to censor their views for the good of the world. Although that's not true, because they did do a lot of censoring in this book. They did a lot of misattributed quotes to different people's names. They didn't necessarily censor the words, but they just said it was someone else who wrote it in order to protect people. But he looked at this as, it's not enough for us to live with our contemporaries and to dominate them. It's not enough. He believed that the intellectuals needed to dominate the future and the history, you know, to write the history so that they can dominate the future. That's what this book was about, right? This set of books. He put a high value on materialism, the principles of materialism. This kind of sums up the principles of materialism. Is nothing is more indisputable than the existence of our sensations. I could have picked at least 3 pages of quotes from different things that this man wrote about how your senses are the way that you interpret the world, and everything is about your senses, which is great, but it totally discounts the whole idea of the spiritual, or the abstract. You know, in your mind, when you're thinking, he wasn't. I mean, even mathematics is kind of it's an abstract art. You can put it to paper and you can apply it, but much of it is thought in your head. I mean, that's the whole idea of spiritualism, and I mean, even just the basis of consciousness and relationships and things like that. He totally discounts any of that with this idea of materialism. I mean, it's the beginning of the scientific method, which is good when you're dealing with the physical world, but humans are more than just the physical material world. He shared Voltaire's view of the value of history in education. Now, I mentioned in the last video, or the video about Peter the Great, I had this feeling that Voltaire was rewriting history with this book. I still believe it. And he's written another book about history I'm going to do a video on soon, but this is one thing that was mentioned. It says progress, which is the aim of all of this, right? Of the Enlightenment is progress. That's above all else. But progress is the secular use of history as the philosophy of teaching by example. Now, what I mentioned in my video about Peter the Great, I kind of got this idea that Voltaire was setting Peter the Great up as this perfect example of a monarchy, or perfect example as a ruler. And that's why he wrote the story, and why he thought that it would be okay to lie, because he doesn't want to remind people of the ugliness. He wants to elevate people's minds and behaviors. So by rewriting history, he's going to, you know, teaching by example. You know, like if you can't be most people, or many people say that when you're a parent, you need to teach the best example for them. The thing that they see every day is the way you live, you know, that living is the best example of how to be, not what you say, but what you do. This is kind of like, oh, let's rewrite history and let's say that they did these great deeds, and it'll make people want to aspire to better things. Now, I'm not sure if that's true. I don't know if that's a good philosophy or not. I mean, because here I am lamenting about how there used to be all these great thinkers, and now we have none, and it feels hopeless. So if if he was rewriting history in order to help people today strive towards better things, it doesn't feel like it's working to me, because the only thing that it's doing is making me wonder what's going on and why we've lost that special something that used to create these great men. Louis de Goncourt was the man who wrote most of the encyclopedia. He wrote 45% to, or so this average, he wrote about a third of all of the encyclopedia, which was, it's a set of encyclopedias. It's the first one alphabetically. It's got all subjects in there. And 4,700,000 words he wrote. At one point he was writing 8 articles per day. Now this is a man who's from Geneva. He was wealthy. He wasn't paid to do any of this. In fact, he paid out of his own pocket a set of secretaries so he could dictate some of these articles. And he ended up dying without hardly any money. It's a very strange story, though. That's not the kind of story that we are used to in our world in the 21st century. Again, this makes me suspicious. Very few people are so generous. Very few rich people are so dedicated to something. Generally, they delegate a lot more if they don't need, man is motivated by rewards. The more you pay somebody, the better, production they're going to give you more of themselves because they feel that they owe it to you. It's just the whole idea of the way that we work. We need incentive, and this man had no incentive, but maybe he did. What was his incentive? What would be the incentive of writing so much, of this such an important work that had so much influence in the future? Obviously, the incentive would to have so much influence on the future. Now, I don't have time to read I haven't had time to read all of the articles or even really skim through this. The encyclopedia is an entire set. It would be like reading this Encyclopedia Britannica from start to finish. So I haven't read many of the articles. Now, he's responsible for writing the ones that people like Voltaire and Rousseau and Diderot and even Diderot were not interested in writing, because they were more interested in writing the political treatises, the ones about the political philosophy, social philosophy, some economics, some of the medical and all the other stuff. But anything that they were not expert on is what this guy filled in, which is most of it, more than they each did. And not much is known. The only thing I could find on this guy is just everybody said great things about him, that he was just wonderful. He didn't talk much. He worked a lot. But again, it's kind of, makes you wonder, like, nobody just does something for nothing. He did this for 20 years. Nobody just does something like that, dedicates their whole life to it, their whole fortune for nothing. And I might one day look more into him, because if he may not exist, he may just be a phantom, and a placeholder, or he may just have sponsors or secrets behind him, other people who wanted to have influence on the future that were backing him. We don't know. So yeah, Voltaire was a major player in this. Like, I've talked about him already a couple times. I believe he is one of the major rewriters of history. I do like him, though. He's very cheerful, and he writes some satire. He's very funny, and I think that his intentions would have been good as far as rewriting society. He wanted to be rid of the barbarism, and he wanted to enlighten people, bring them to culture. But the thing is you can't do that. You can't do that falsely. You have to let people be who they are, and when you do it falsely, you're going to get some major hiccups. You're going to get some because all of your ideas are going to be taken to an extreme, and it's going to mess with things. His atheism, for instance, was it was in response to a horrible, a time of horrible persecution by the Catholic Church, but it was such a reactionary that it left a lot to be desired for the future, and it's kind of where we are today in a lot of ways, because there is no room for spiritualism in our world, which sucks. Another guy, he was very influential in the French Revolution as well. Like he serves as the inspiration for the national system of education. He wrote Emile, or On Education, which is one of the first. He's considered the father of education. And he also was influential in the French Revolution, which is just, the whole thing is suspect because the French Revolution, and then later the Russian Revolution, I mean, and then later the Nazis, and everyone in every single regime in Europe, except for Britain, has been completely overturned, wiped out, burned. So we really don't know what the real history is. Really don't. And then Britain, not sure I trust them either, really, when it comes to it. But so anyway, so we're getting to this whole idea of what influence did the encyclopedia have? First of all, 17 volumes of articles issued from 1751 to 1765, 11 volumes of illustrations, only illustrations. Oh, I would love to see that, right? That would be 11 volumes of literature that I would love to have. 1762 to 1772, 18,000 pages of text, 75,000 entries, those are articles, 44,000 main articles, 28,000 secondary articles, 25,000 illustration indices, 20 million words in total. It was printed 4,250 copies. But what does that do? This is like, you take all this information, and what is it? As cool as it is to have a set of encyclopedia that tells you a little bit about everything, it's a lot like Wikipedia, right? It takes all of the knowledge of the world, the known knowledge, and it filters it down to something something you can digest, something you could read. What becomes accepted knowledge. But see, this is before the digital age, so we have Wikipedia, but we still have access to all these other avenues of finding out what is out there for the same subject. This really became do you remember, I don't know if you're not my age, I'm in my 40s, and when I was just beginning school, when I was in junior high, we would have to write, junior high and high school, when we would write our papers, we had to go to the library, and 90% of where we got our information from 99% was from the encyclopedias, right? When I got into a little bit more sophisticated learning, I had to look for more source, a few more source texts. By then we were online and it was a little bit easier. But before all that, I mean, it was the encyclopedia was where you got everything. And so whatever was in there was what was known. So what does the word encyclopedia mean? Okay, well, it's taken from a Greek word. I'm not even going to try that, but okay. Enkyklios paedia. Okay, I probably butchered that. Please forgive me. The literal translation means education in a circle. Does that sound a lot like our school system today? Kind of does to me. Education in a circle, spinning your wheels. Cyclos, round, wheel, circle. Encyclo, in a circle, going in a circle. And then I just remembered Cyclops, the one-eyed Titan. Singular view of the world, the one view of the world. So you're gathering all of the knowledge and you're filtering it through one filter so that everybody agrees on everything, right? Kind of like how now today you hear Obama say things like, oh, we used to all have to work off the same set of facts. And he was lamenting against the idea of Fox providing another set of news, not anything that was a lie necessarily, just information that the other news sources were not providing, which created, different interpretations from people. And he didn't like that. And liberals don't like that. That's why, it all goes back to this. They figured out the best way to control people is to have one source of information. Pedia means education, child rearing specifically. That's interesting, isn't it? This whole idea of encyclopedia, which was supposed to just be a set of books that were for everybody so they could learn about the world, but it seems like it's actually specifically targeting children, right? Pedio, child, encyclopedia, re-education, it's targeting children because you're trying to get one world view. What was the goal? The control of the collective knowledge. What was the target? Your brain. 3 things that the encyclopedia did. It's the centralization of knowledge, like I was just saying. If everybody agrees on the same set of, on what happened, then there's very few interpretations that you could take from it. If you get more than one take on something that has happened, or something, other approaches on how to do something, or other theories about the nature of things, you're going to have disagreement, and you're going to have, people are going to think more, and it's going to be harder to control them. The other major thing that they did, the categorization of knowledge. Because in order to present all of this knowledge, basically what they believed was the collection of everything known, to the people in a coherent fashion, they had to create categories. And these categories really shape the way that things are thought of in the future. Because, let's say one section of science, like let's say chemistry, they actually had to move chemistry from a science, from a microbiology section into a medicine section. So there's just you understand how the category can affect the results or affect how people think of it. There's a lot of different ways that can happen, but it really does. If you view philosophy as a science of, of abstract rather than a science of the way that we deal with the physical world, then you're going to not take philosophy as seriously. Do you know what I mean? So the categorization of knowledge really, really still to this day influences the way that we think. And then there's the specialization of knowledge. This is the first time that knowledge was broken down into such specific categories and entries. And what it ended up happening is it created this whole idea of experts on one subject, rather than the age-old idea of the Renaissance man who knows everything. Like the story of Peter the Great, where he was able to pick up the art of boat making instantly, along with the art of watchmaking, but still be able to create art and still be able to, run nations and be a husband. I mean, he was able to do it all. We don't do that anymore. And I think that it goes back to the beginning of this encyclopedia. And part of it is when we have theories that are set in stone, like the theories of Isaac Newton, the theories of gravity, the theories of the heliocentric model. This is when they were cemented. All of these theories about the nature of the world has given us this sense that everything's already been discovered. And what it does is education, and the public education, it basically is a practice of just filling our mind, right? So instead of going out and figuring things out for ourselves, we are told the way the world works, and then we have nothing left to figure out, and it creates a stagnation in our minds. Just funneling information into our mind that's already been figured out. I don't think that that's the way I think that they do that on purpose to keep people from thinking. It's much easier to control. The universe, if we may be permitted to say so, would only be a single fact and a great truth for whoever knew how to embrace it from a single point of view. That's the philosophy of this. The encyclopedia represents one step in the effort to achieve this single point of view. That's the virtue that they're looking for, which is ridiculous. That's anti-science, a single point of view. It completely goes against the entire idea of discovery. I mean, it's not tolerant. It wraps up the way that the leftists view the world today. They want everything to be a singular point of view, and as long as you agree with that, then they will give you your freedoms, like, you could earrings, or you can look however you want, or you can express your sexuality like in any deviant way. But as long as you have a worldview, then they have a method of control. And this idea that everything has been discovered. I mean, remember if you've seen the Truman Show, the character Truman, who is trapped in this world that was created just for him, and he wanted to grow up to be an explorer. And the teacher goes, "Oh, silly Truman, everything's already been discovered." You remember that? That is that it seems to be the point of this whole project of this encyclopedia, which I believe could be a cover or a rewrite of many things. But everything's already been discovered. You don't need to think. You don't need to want to explore Antarctica. You don't need to want to create new airplanes or airships to fly yourself around the world. We have regulations that stop that. You don't need to create your own ship because you can't sail the waters freely anyways. We'll call you a pirate and the Navy will come after you. You don't need to come up with new theories about atoms or about vibration and sound and free energy, because we just need to find a way to solve the fossil fuels, but we need to find a way to solve it in a way that we can make money off of. And it's funny, the other thing about these men of the previous centuries, I didn't include them, but there was many, many, many music theory scholars, composers and men of music, and we do not see that anymore. No one's going to call Dr. Dre a scholar. No one's going to call Katy Perry a Renaissance woman or a woman of learning. But that's what it used to be up until the Age of Enlightenment, and then there just a little bit afterwards, and then there's no more great men who make music, and that's suspicious, isn't it? This is another point that this is somebody talking about this encyclopedia, and it mentions here at the end, he basically says everything has been discussed, analyzed, or at least stirred about. So it's okay, and this is basically what this is all about, but you guys don't have to think anymore because it's all been done. It's really scary. And so that creates this idea of the specialization of knowledge, which basically comes down to the division of labor. Devised during the Age of Enlightenment, specialization. And now that makes people more productive when they're making things on a massive scale, right? When you're like, it gave rise to the age of industrialization, right? The mass production of things. And that came about because of the specialized nature of labor, but a lot of it's repetitive and none of it is about thinking. And what it does is it creates hierarchies. This is an older version, but the specialization of labor even breaks these down into smaller parts to where each person does one thing, and it's only the management who is able to put the parts together. So the average person knows everything about the one thing they're doing to the point of ad nauseum, to where we think that things are hard to learn because you get a master's degree in something specific and it takes so long. When you, at the same time, what these people 200, 300 years ago were doing is they would take that same amount of time and learn everything and the way that everything worked together, and they would be able to invent things from that knowledge. They would be able to create new theories of thought. They were able to create new ideas of mechanization and just, watches. Just the idea of creating gears and watches is amazing. And we haven't learned anything breakthrough in 200, 300 years, since the combustion engine was the most recent, and wasn't that great, or I guess the digital age, which is really great, but I'm hoping it can give forth onto something new again, to where we can all be Renaissance thinkers again, because it's not that hard to learn things. And a master, somebody is a doctorate in something, they know a lot about one thing, but how much is there to know about one thing? Isn't a lot of that circular knowledge? Isn't a lot of that repetitive? Isn't a lot of that just designed to make the average person, think they're stupid because they don't understand, when really it's just the person saying the same thing over and over again in like 16 different forms? That's the way I see it. And look at this. This is a very vague view. According to Collins Dictionary, the division of labor is the process whereby productive tasks become separated and more specialized. Okay, duh. Or, okay, this is a way of organizing work, especially making things so that particular types of work are done by particular people. That is the most bland and boring definition I've ever heard. And what it is it's a way for the elite to gain more power. It's a way to impose drudgery onto the common person. Now, we are reliant on this idea of specialization because we live in such a materialist world. Materialism was introduced to us by these people. Capitalist ideals of materialism, of owning things. If we could let go of some of that, now I am a capitalist, don't get me wrong. What I am against is mass production of banal things. Mass production of cars is great. Everybody needs a car. Mass production of computers, things like that. But these little trinkets that we get from China, you know, this plastic crap that we don't need, not cool. Pens, like anything that we use is fine. But we need to get back to the artisan, to the, you know, we don't need to have such specialization of labor because we can automate the specialization of labor and then people can get back to thinking again. Don't let them make you think that you're afraid of automation, of, oh, everybody's going to lose jobs. No, they're going to gain more because they're going to be able to create things and use their mind in order to make their own way in the world. And it's going to be better. It's going to go back to what we used to have because we aren't going to be mindless robots anymore. There's, you know, the managers are not going to be the gatekeepers of knowledge anymore. We're not going to have a crew of 6 people that all do something separate, that don't know what the whole is. And it's the management only that can take it all and put it together themselves. That's the management's being gatekeepers of knowledge, of keeping their own job. Now, I'm not saying that it sounds dangerously Marxist here, but that's not where I'm going with this. I'm talking about bureaucracy and redundancy. We can get rid of a lot of this with automation, and we can open up our world and increase our minds again. Now, this idea that the encyclopedia did is they also introduced a whole compendium of knowledge into the world. And they made some mistakes. They made some serious mistakes. And I think that the elite have realized this now and they won't do it again. Some of those mistakes have to do with the information that they put out in the encyclopedia. They put in information about forts, about cannons, how to build them, what they're made of, how to make black powder, how to build a gun. This is exactly all the components on how to build a rifle. Now, this kind of knowledge today is kept close. It's kept close to the, it's really not very easy to get this kind of knowledge today. It's not just available to the public. This is kind of a thing that I don't know. I don't believe in censorship, but I do believe that the people who were involved in this book were overly concerned with military matters. And the release of this knowledge, this is just a few of them. The release of this knowledge on a massive scale in a world where people could still think created the next biggest jump in technology in warfare that you can imagine. It was before we had gotten to the point where countries, it was considered bad form to conquer each other. And what it led to was the kind of destruction of World War I, the increased technology in cannon technology and gun technology was really bad. World War I was bad. Okay, so increase the weapon warfare combined with the materialism, which is very, very in line with the ideas of conquest, combined with the Darwinist ideas of survival of the fittest. And these became a very bad mixture. And it created what became the total annihilation of hundreds of millions of people in the 21st century. But conveniently for these people who may have really been behind a reset, it also destroyed a lot of the records of the previous world. I don't know if it was on purpose. I don't know if they released this information into the world ignorantly or on purpose hoping that people would destroy each other. We don't know. But it is something that's definitely noteworthy and something worth thinking about. De-skilling is what the centralization or the specialization of labor does. People become dumb. They forget how to do other things. They forget that they can think. Remember, knowledge is power, and that is true now more than ever. If you want to fight against all of this stuff that I'm talking about, this brain drain, this control of information, what we're in now is the information age, and we have access to more information than ever before. Educate yourself. Learn about things. Use this Socrates, or the method used by Socrates, Socratic method, excuse me. Look it up. Look at how Socrates taught. Ask yourself questions. Teach yourself to think. Don't use the Aristotle approach that this book kind of led us into, which is just filling up the brain with knowledge, with information and facts. Teach people how to think. Have you ever had anybody in a discussion ask you, well, are you a scientist? Well, when did you get your doctorate? Well, do you have a degree in that? That's the Aristotle way of thinking, and that's what this whole thing is about. You don't need to be an expert in something to have an opinion or to know something about it. You don't need to be an expert in metallurgy, to start smelting metals. I actually started making some jewelry, and I've melted metals, and I've done a little chemistry with that, and it's not that hard. I've made magnets. You don't need to go to school to do this stuff. If you want to experiment with the ideas of free energy, vibration, sound, you can do these things. You can do them in your own world. You can do them in your garage. You can do them in your living room. You have the power because you have a mind. You can think, and you should use it. And that's basically what I was getting at with this video today, is breaking it down to where whatever happened, we can reverse it. And this was a tool, I believe, that was used to cover it. And we can fight against that. There's enough of us to where we can all learn as much as we want. We don't have to become specialized in one thing. I think that goes against human nature in my mind. But go out and do it and learn as much as you can. And don't let the powers that be that want to control us be able to take this from us again. Because we are in the age of information and we have another chance. Take it. Okay, guys, that's my video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.